Lots of learning. Okay, well, thank you for coming to spend your last hour of the day with us. I'm going to share with you a little bit about how Netflix binges on data and how we're working to enable analytics in our organization. So let's jump in and get started. About 2 years ago, in 2016, the beginning of the year, we turned on our service everywhere. In just a few hours, we flipped switches and turned on all of our cloud services, and almost all countries in the world had access to Netflix. And since then, we've been working on making our product better. We've been working on things like language localization and changing the UX to make sure that it works best for different devices, working on our algorithms and content recommendation. We've done things like flip it all the way around so that it works better for countries that lead right to left. And of course, we've been investing heavily in our original content. Shows that a few of you may know, like Stranger Things. All right. Some other shows that maybe people don't like as much, like Bright, although I'm a fan. And you often find that there's content that we can make or create that is from a specific market that then works well across the globe. And so we've been looking to create original shows that travel well and that people across the world who are members can enjoy watching. All of our product investments and content investments have helped us grow our member base from less than 10 million people 10 years ago to 137 million people today. It's not just our product investments and our content investments that make that happen. It's everything we do as an organization. And one of the biggest things that helps us move forward is big data. And we're known for being a big data company and taking advantage of that data. But of course, we're all here to hear about the analytics part. So let's start diving into that. Real briefly about myself, this is me. I decided I'd wear the same shirt just to make it easy. In case you couldn't figure out who I was. I've been at Netflix since the days of Quickster. Anybody remember Quickster? Okay, some fans. I'll let you figure out when that was. I currently work in the Science and Analytics department. That's the group that focuses on our experimentation, machine learning, analytics, and the analytic environment. And I and my team and others work very closely with our data engineering and infrastructure team that's responsible for our platform, including Tableau, as well as making data flow through the organization. On a personal note, I worked at Deloitte doing forensic investigations before this. So if you want to talk about the DOJ, let me know. I was at the CSU system before that. I've got a couple of kids and an amazing wife, and we just got a puppy. Today, I'm going to share with you, staying true to the title, Binging on Data, Enabling Analytics, and then talk about our Tableau environment and some of the challenges we're facing that we're still trying to work through. So I've had the opportunity to work at Netflix since Quickster, which is about 10 years ago. And I have the pleasure of working with some analytic professionals that have been there even longer. And they've shared that since Reed helped found the company, he's brought a focus on metrics and data and measurement. And since then, we've had a report pack that goes out that sets key metric tone and perspective for all of our executives across the company. And so we've had that for over 10 years. He and others who lead Netflix came from technology startups and brought with them the idea of A/B testing, which is very common in the tech space. So really, I think part of our culture is to be data-driven because of our top-down leadership and the focus on that. And I'm sure for those of you that work at organizations where you have executive sponsorship, you can see that difference, or you wish you had that. And I think that we sort of have been fortunate to have that since the beginning. Analytics and this sense of using data is pervasive through the company. We use it for recruiting, how we collaborate, how we share information, and how we design our product. And we really have a data culture that lends itself towards everybody being hungry for information and really wanting to access that information. So for us, data is truly ubiquitous, and analytics is ubiquitous. We have our engineering teams logging information to better measure the products and understand how to change it. Our customer service team helps measure the health of the customer, gives them a voice internally. And we A/B test almost everything. The product changes, the sign-up flow, how we do payments, how we optimize around messaging and telling you about those new seasons like Stranger Things coming up. Of course, we're well known for our algorithms on content recommendation and in our content purchasing and marketing decisions. At Netflix, we have about 5,000 employees, and 300 of them are in dedicated data teams working to make information flow and enable access to analytics. We have 200 people that are in other teams that are focused on analytics as well, in our teams like finance planning and consumer insights. And that means that we actually have thousands of engineers and thousands of business users that all would like to have information. Our data culture and our hunger for data and the desire to binge on data is what has given rise to an analytic ecosystem. So this image shows the different major analytic tools that we have at Netflix. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with Tableau. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And MicroStrategy perhaps as well. It's a BI platform that we still use. And you'll notice a standout by volume here. We have almost 5,000 assets in this tool called Lumen. That's actually an internal engineering tool that we use for service monitoring. And it's programmatically driven, so it's quite easy to stand up views there. Of course, R Shiny, it's a nice interface for data scientists building models in R and trying to give people access to those. And we have a collection of other tools, some that are on this list, some that are not, that all form this analytic ecosystem. But we're all here to hear about Tableau at Netflix, so let's change to that. We started using Tableau in about 2014. And since then, at that point, we only had a few hundred users. And we've now grown to over 2,000 users of the Tableau environment. So we've seen really, really nice growth rate and adoption of the product as we've invested more in it and people have become more familiar with the way it works. When we look at who's using it, we can actually see this nice separation happening where our non-data departments are using it more and more. And that's really where our growth is coming from. And I'm happy to share that earlier this year, we actually passed a major milestone where our non-data users actually published more into our ecosystem than our data departments. And I look at this as a good sign that we've been successful at enabling analytics on the Tableau platform. So how do we go about doing that? There's two big things that I'll talk about. But first, I want to say that we want to enable analytics for individual users, and these users, and all of our users, and really enable them to get access to our big data platform on Tableau. We do that primarily through our big data portal, which I'll walk through, and the way we think about and have people work together. So the big data portal is something that I'll show you and share. But first, I'd like to walk through our data platform, at least at a high level. All of you may not be familiar with it, although we have many things on YouTube that you can use to dig in deeper. Or if you have questions later, we're happy to answer them. So our users interact with devices like TVs or mobile phones or their laptop to watch content. And that device interacts with our services running in AWS. We run 100% in Amazon Web Services. And as those devices and services are working together, they emit a data stream. That data stream flows onto Kafka, which is our data bus. And all of those events land in S3 file storage. S3 is Amazon's simple storage service, and we look at that as the data warehouse for the company. All of our raw data lands in S3. All of the business logic that we apply to it and transform rewrites into S3, and so we access everything there. We do that business logic application and processing with the tools, big data tools like Spark, Hadoop, and also do more ad hoc, smaller jobs with a tool called Presto. We'll take some of that data, but not all of it, and copy it forward into more traditional warehouse tools or MPP analytic databases that are primarily SQL first, like Snowflake or Redshift, and also a tool called Druid, which I'll spend a little bit more time talking about later today. And then, of course, we surface that information through our analytic tools, Tableau, Python, or other things, and this is where Big Data Portal fits in. The Big Data Portal is really our key enabler for helping unlock analytic value of our big data at Netflix. It's what we've been focused on building over the last 18 months, and our data engineering and infrastructure team has been primarily building it out for us, and then the other teams help contribute content into it. And in this tool, we've tried to put discovery, navigation, access to information, documentation. So the default view a user might get when they land here is something like we see here, which is actually my page. It shows me things like my recently viewed spaces and reports, and I can also search by tags, or I can search across the reports by author or keyword or description. And so this is a great starting point for things that have already been built by our data teams or by our other users that have been made available for people to use. At the top, we have a navigation bar, and that lets people move beyond their discovery or recently used list into other parts of the big data portal. And you might be thinking to yourself, why not use Tableau Server? It has discovery, it has searching, it has ways to filter things. It's really because we have this broader analytic ecosystem. So we've built the big data portal to be able to pull together assets and information across all of these so that people can really find what they're looking for and work with information wherever it may be. If we look at a space that's established that collects a set of information, like our payment analytics space, here we have links to assets built both in Tableau as well as on different data environments. So from one location, people can navigate away to whatever they need. We also have links into Tableau data sources that people can use as a self-serve starting point to explore and build and publish new things. And then we can also link in memos, FAQs, or point to other systems that make it easier for people to work with data. But really where this all comes together to enable analytics is in the table and query areas. Tables, which you can navigate to at the top, is where we've organized our information about our business. Here, for example, we have some data tables around the growth area, which is what my team works with. And if we look into the growth area, we can see that we have a couple of sections, acquisition and messaging. If we look at messaging, you can actually see the individual tables with descriptions and the author and the owner. Then if you click into it, you get to your schema. So we've really provided a way to sort of look at the business, understand the domains, and navigate to the information that you need to work with to create and do your own analysis. You can also find more information about how the table's stored in AWS, as well as Data Lineage. And then there's navigation and links out to richer data information around our data model, as well as example queries that you can build from to get started. Where that all comes back to being useful, though, is in this query interface. So this is, again, something that you can navigate to if you want to create something new from scratch for yourself, rather than work on something that's already been published. So an analyst can author either a data access query or an analytic query, and then run it. And from a drop-down on the left-hand side, they can choose which environment they want to run in. They can run against their cloud data systems, like Presto, or with Spark SQL, or they can access the data that we've stored in other tools like Redshift or Snowflake. If you need to still understand the table to a higher extent, we have the schema in line so that you can refer back to that. You can save your queries, come back to them later, or share them with other users, as well as look at your query history. But I want to draw your attention to this data viewer area. And this lets users explore and interact the data in line. You can filter, you can reorder the columns, you can explore it here. And it helps you refine what you're looking for as you iterate through the query that you're assembling based on table information. But at the top of it, you'll notice a series of buttons. So I want to draw your attention to those buttons. And there's really two things here that have helped us out immensely and help people have better access to information. The first is this download as TDE button. This lets users, with one click, bring the data out of our big data environment to their laptop, where they can then build and explore and create with Tableau. And similarly, they can, with the other button, publish that to our Tableau server, where often we want the data to end up anyway. And they can put it there to begin with, build around that, and then have an easier path to sharing. So these have really helped us unlock the data environment in the cloud and make it cross the boundary into Tableau so that users don't have to do other things and make other connections happen. And it just eliminates steps from the process and makes us more efficient. So a big part of us enabling analytics at Netflix is leaning into the big data portal and really making it our location for people to explore what's already built, to discover, to understand, and to author. So let's pivot now to people and how people work together. In our culture deck, in our culture memo, we refer to the idea of being highly aligned and loosely coupled. And really what that means is trying to drive our context up while lowering the need for process. We try to have people in one area focus on one part of the business so that they can have high context and understand what needs to happen and what the priorities are, as well as focus on goals that are in front of the company and execute on those, and try to eliminate crossover and prioritization and top-down management. And how that translates to the way we work is we've thought of business areas and teams working together as vertical teams. So we have a group of teams that work together on driving content forward, and marketing, and growth, and tech. And different teams come together to move these forward. We have our engineering teams that own the relationships with our upstream systems and services and build those. And the data engineering team helps make sure the data flows from those systems into our data warehouse, our big data lake, and make sure it's available and has high quality and that it's accessible for people to access. Our science and analytics team works with the business a little bit more directly, working on experimentation or building out the analytic environment. And then our business teams and analytic teams like consumer insights work on other aspects using the same data. So we found that this aligned strategy really makes it possible for people to keep that high context and work well together without having to go to different parts and spaces of the organization. Key to that, too, has been our use of Slack. This has actually been a big enabler for us. And it's not just Slack, but it's Slack and communication in general. But Slack in particular has been helpful because we can create these rooms, these channels that people can go into and ask questions and get answers. So if we have a consumer insights analyst that's trying to write a query and they need some help because they don't understand where to find something, they can click through to the Slack channel, either through the client or we embed links in different assets. In Tableau workbooks, in our documentation, we can just drop people directly in and they can ask. So they might get an answer back from a peer that's already done the same work. Or they might talk to an analyst in our data science department that can say, hey, that's really something better to handle as a model. Or they can get clarity from a data engineer or source engineer on what they're looking at. So we've really found that it's powerful to align our teams and give them a focus and a priority, and then make it very easy for them to communicate together. And we saw that our community and our user base has been growing really nicely. We've kicked off some other parts around community. We have a Tableau user group internally, and we've started some education tracks for people to follow. But this is actually something that we have a lot of, I think, development work to do on, and it's pretty early days. So in 2019, we'll be continuing to work on things like office hours, Tableau days, Data Doctor, and more. So another big component of us enabling analytics at the company is thinking about people, how they align, and how they work together and communicate. All right, let's switch to the Tableau environment. So at Netflix, we're currently running version 10.4, which is back a few versions. This quarter, we're going to be working on our upgrade to 2018.2. And we're not going to go to .3 because that's a little too fresh, but we need to get off 10.4 because we'd like to use Hyper. We haven't moved yet because we have a lot of extracts, and Hyper is something that we're still testing through. As I mentioned, we have about 2,000 users of our server environment and about 250 developers on desktop. I can see that's going on Twitter quickly. We're running on 7 pretty beefy servers in AWS, hundreds of CPUs, a couple terabytes of RAM. It's almost as powerful as my gaming machine at home. Not quite, though. We're set up in this cluster config right now. We have 3 primary servers, and we have 4 backgrounders. And the reason we have so many backgrounders is that we heavily rely on Tableau data extracts. In fact, we love Tableau data extracts. The vast majority of our data sources are actually extracts, about 90% of them, and we only have a couple hundred connections that are live back to our data environment. And that's really because of the big data that we have. It's difficult to have performance when we're querying back into billions or tens of billions of rows data sets. So extracts have given us this nice intermediate layer where we can have some caching and some aggregation and rely on a local server to provide that. So our backgrounders are there to help us build those extracts. So we actually have about 1,500 extracts currently running in our environment, and they're sort of split. About half are running, are created by the extract API, and we push those to the server. And then about half of them are run from the server on the backgrounders based on schedules. Well, why this split? Why does this exist? We really have a couple of major development patterns that people follow. One is the best practice pattern, we can call it. And this is what we'd prefer everybody to follow, and I'd say what our data professionals follow for the most part. You explore data as needed in the big data portal. You develop your query, but then you need to commit it to our code base, schedule it so it runs when upstream dependencies are ready. Then you have to push that job, or run that job so it pushes the extract to the server, and then you can finally sort of connect to that and develop your viz, and then publish and share from there. So this is a more robust pattern. It integrates with our paved path. It lets us control our code base and understand our data lineage and dependencies better, but it's got a lot of overhead. So to enable business users, this is not really elegant or great. And what we actually see people do more in our self-serve pattern is these 4 simple steps. You still develop your query. You still understand the data. You just drop that into Tableau with a direct data connection to something like Presto. Build your viz, publish everything to the server, and then schedule it on a wall clock schedule. So the half of our extracts that are running, building on the server side are really on wall clock schedules. It's a bit of a dilemma for us. We'd really like people to follow the more robust pattern, but it's definitely complex, and there's overhead, and you have to be a more technical user. And the self-serve pattern is easy, but harder for us to manage because it's harder to see where everything's flowing. So what are we going to do about that? What we're currently working on is an easy button. And we're going to add another button to the big data portal that is effectively publish and refresh. So this is something our platform team is working on. And what we'll do here is give another choice. With one click, the user can take the query they've developed for the data that they want to look at on a regular basis, and it will automatically commit the code to our code repository, schedule the job with all upstream dependencies, deploy the extract to the server, and make sure that it builds and refreshes every day. So we actually think this is going to be another big unlock to reduce this friction and get people into a better development pattern that we can manage and scale more effectively by keeping it really easy. So building a robust Tableau environment and trying to simplify it as much as possible is another big part of us trying to enable our analytics. Okay, let's walk through some challenges at Netflix. We all have challenges. I'm sure you all do as well. I thought I'd share these. These are what we're currently working on, among other things. And by no means do we have all the answers. So here's some dirty laundry. Happy to hear what other people are doing around this and help us learn as well. That's why we're all here at the conference. So 3 challenges that I'll walk through are data scale, data lineage, and reporting. Not interactive analysis. It's the thing that we all still have to do to some extent. So data scale. I alluded to this earlier. Netflix is known for big data. We have what I think is really big data. We're not the largest data company in the world. There's a few social networks that probably take that prize, and of course, different industries have really big data players. But we have data that's big enough that it causes a lot of challenges for us, and we have to work through those, especially to try to make data flow into our Tableau environment. So we have about 1 trillion new data events that flow through our data pipeline every day that we can manipulate and apply logic to turn into business information. We have 150 petabytes of data sitting in our S3 warehouse right now that we can make available to all of our end user analysts that want to access information. We rewrite about 300 terabytes a day of new information based on all of that, and we consume about 5 petabytes daily, either through ad hoc queries, scheduled jobs, or other general exploration. So to me, this is like substantial data. I can't just connect Tableau to 150 petabytes and expect a couple terabytes of data to come back. So we're constantly balancing the data volume that we can serve in a viz or in an exploratory tool and the level of detail of that data against how quickly people can access that information and how much prep we need to do to sort of reduce and manage the data volume. So that is really leaving our Tableau end users with a choice that they have to make. They can decide to have the data and access the part of data that we have in an MPP system like Snowflake, and maybe they can access a few billion rows. But the queries could be fast, or they could take several minutes. If we leave all the data in the cloud and they access it there, they can get access to everything, tens of billions of rows at a time, but those queries may take many minutes to run. It's not exactly an interactive analytic experience. And that's why we have so many people developing in Tableau using extracts. We can cache and aggregate to a size appropriate enough to make the performance at a several second level, which does make for a good interactive analytic experience. However, the trade-off is data volume. You can't put that much data in an extract and have it run. At least we haven't figured out how to do that yet. With Hyper coming, we do expect that that's going to help, but we have a limitation there. So these are sort of the three choices that most people have to make. On the data team side, we've actually been working on choice 4, which is our current project to try to enable access to really big data use cases so that we can increase our interactivity and have an interactive UI, or maybe to explore new data viz styles. So what we've been doing here is building analytic applications as web apps with JavaScript, accessing this data in the data store I mentioned earlier called Druid. Who's heard of Druid? All right, we've got about 6 people, so I thought that might be the case. I'll walk through it. So Druid is an open source data system built specifically for analytic applications. I'm a big fan of Tableau, and my second prize goes to Druid. It was built by a company called MetaMarkets back in 2011. It's now an open source project in the Apache Incubator program. And it pretty much does everything you'd want a data store to do. It's distributed, it's horizontally scalable, it's columnar, it's compressed, and it's indexed, which translates to it's really, really, really fast for data read, which is what we often need to do in our dashboards. And so you can access this information in sub-second to several second performance. So at Netflix right now, we have 80 terabytes of data online in this tool, spread out over 100 backend nodes, and we can scale that up as much as we need to. So it's really awesome, but it doesn't have SQL, which means it doesn't really work nicely with Tableau. Natively, the way it works best is through JSON. So you express a query in JSON, and you submit that to a REST endpoint, and you get your data back in JSON. And that's not a thing that Tableau can do, either direction. And we could write a web connector in between, but then that limits us on the interactivity. So we're currently using that, but to take advantage of it, we have to sort of go outside the Tableau ecosystem. So what we'd really like to see is, can we get Tableau connected to Druid? The goal here would be to get all of these performance benefits and access to a much larger scale of data, and ideally have one data pool that our applications can use, as well as our Tableau dashboards and our Tableau self-service environment. So we're currently looking at this. There's actually now a sort of SQL layer built into Druid that has built based on another Apache project that does code translation. But we've actually been talking to the data connector team here, and they're currently working on, I think just today I got an email that they're opening up a developer program to build your own data connectors. So we're going to work with them to hopefully come up with a way to take Tableau's query expressions and translate those into something that can interface with Druid. There are some companies that have had some success at this. We are able to connect, we can retrieve data, but it doesn't work well with things like level of detail calculations or filters or certain aggregation types. So there's still a lot of room ahead of us to take advantage of this. So in the meantime, we're going to do our upgraded 2018.2. We expect we'll get some win from Hyper. I think that's really going to help us on our small to medium use cases. And for our really large, current large data use cases, we're putting more of that into Snowflake and taking advantage of that systems architecture, which is actually not that dissimilar from Druid, to give us access to larger volumes, and it does speak SQL natively. So for us, data scale is always a challenge, and it has been since I've been at the company. Okay, data lineage. I think this is sort of a perpetual problem for most of us, no matter what platform you're working on or what you're using. People want to know, where did the data come from, and can I trust this data? And The cool thing about Tableau, and I think why it adopts so well and people love to work with it, is that you get really good stuff from it pretty quickly. Any data source you want, for the most part, except Druid, you can connect to, pull data in, and quickly analyze it, build something very nice and interactive, and share that with people. And you can get started and learn the basics relatively quickly. It's also like its worst enemy. It's its own flaw, because anybody can do this and anybody can share it. And before you know it, you end up with sort of workbook explosion and data source explosion, and it becomes really difficult to say, where did the data come from, and can I trust it? I'll walk you through an example that my team is currently working on. We have this, and what this is sort of a spaghetti diagram / we've been calling it the loom, because it looks a little bit like how you make a rug. And I'll walk through what it means. So there's 5 business areas at the top that we're responsible for. Messaging, partnerships, the executive staff views, a couple others. These all have a lot of overlap and commonality, and that's why we're working on trying to improve them holistically. This level indicates the workbooks. There's a few dozen workbooks that people work with that are there, probably too many. We could consolidate some of that. But this is where it gets a little bit crazy. This is the number of data sources that they connect to, and this is the base tables that they connect to. And you can see that there's just this giant fan of connections. And it's sort of impossible to tell where's the data coming from and can I trust it. And the downside to this, and I have to thank somebody on my team who I don't think is here at the moment, but thank you, Mark. He built this manually. He had to go scrape the workbooks. He had to go look at the ETL repository. He had to assemble this all manually just to create this level of perspective. And it's valuable, and we'd love to have it more often, but it's really difficult to build right now. So we'd love to have better data lineage with Tableau. And we do have data lineage, but not about Tableau. In our big data platform, we have 2 services, one called Metacat, which keeps track of our tables and our columns across all of our data stores in the cloud, and Charlotte, which keeps track of all of the jobs that these are built with. You can think Charlotte's Web. And these 2 services are what we have built the rest of our data platform around, but we hit a wall with Tableau. There's not a great way to break through that wall and connect to the information about workbooks and viz that are there. So what we're hoping for and currently talking to Tableau about, there's actually a lab here this week about it if you want to go learn some more. They're working on some things that they're calling metadata APIs. And metadata APIs are a way to programmatically access inventory on the server to understand workbooks, data sources, and the metrics in the workbooks and see where they're coming from. And our goal here would be to be able to access and use that API information to automatically build enough information that we could look at the relationships and work on projects like consolidation or making discovery of the information and what's best to use and you can trust for our end users. Something that was announced today at the keynote is the data model. And this is another upcoming area that we think is going to be very helpful for us to improve our ecosystem. So this is a quick snap of the keynote I took this morning. Yep, fresh off the presses. And as was explained, this is a different way to connect to your data store, where you can automatically interpret table relationships, and it will manage joins for you and help you avoid things like LOD calculations and data blending. So we're hoping that that takes us from having something like 12 different connections to build up a view to something that's like 1 or 2, so that we can just simply reduce the number of data sources that we have to manage and publish on the server, reduce the complexity, the discoverability, and again, help end users know better what to access. So in the meantime, we're leaning into our vertical teams, trying to have those teams collaborate a little bit more effectively, communicate more, understand what's already previously built. We'll still work on some brute force manual methods to try to get this information. One thing maybe to talk about afterward is we've thought about working with other companies like Alation or Unify or Calibra that do data catalogs. The challenge we have with working with these companies typically is that it's a third system. So now we have our data platform and Tableau and a third party, and how you integrate everything just starts to become very, very complex, and often is not, for us, at least worth the trade-off. But would love to hear lessons learned from others. Okay, the last and least amazing challenge is reporting. We actually have many use cases where we need to create paginated, formatted reports that either go to internal groups or go to external parties. So we do this through our partnerships, we do it with content studio partners, and there are things that we just have to have look good and be built all the time. The challenge with Tableau is that it's pretty hard to make that scale well from our experience. So what we currently do to approach this is build a set of views in a workbook. Often it's a page per view, or maybe you have a view per chart. And in Google Sheets, we manage metadata to drive the filtering configuration of those views so that we can say, here's 27 configurations of this template, pass through on the URL as a parameter, filters for country, for partner, for device, for whatever it may be. And we also keep track in our Google Sheet metadata management who gets those reports. We then use tab commands to generate all the images that we need or PDFs that we need based on those parameters. And then we wrap everything up in Python to manage some of the formatting and the distribution out. So it works. We use it. We had to assemble it mostly ourselves, but it's not elegant or easy and hard to manage. So what we'd love to see is something that lets us do better pagination and layout and page control, the ability to export formats, maybe to PDF or to HTML and CSS, and then especially improve the distribution management. Controlling who gets what and when is a bit obtuse right now in the product. You can go in and manage some things, but you can't manage for groups or larger distributions. So this is something that we're still definitely trying to explore and find the best path forward on. So, looking forward to the next year, and before we meet again at the next conference, we're going to continue trying to drive our user base growth and make it easier and easier for people to use the platform, leaning in on our portal, looking for those easy buttons, and trying to solve some of our challenges, including scaling and lineage, reporting, et cetera. And ideally, we're helping to continue to unlock value for all of our end users and let them really embrace data everywhere, as we've seen is valuable in our data culture over time. Before we wrap up, I actually wanted to ask or mention a few things to you. So first, I want to say thank you. We're a large technology company, and we're sharing with you today some of what we're doing. But I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge that all of you are also working on pushing Tableau forward. And while we're working to spread the joy of content around the globe, many of you are working in education and healthcare and other industries as well, and helping everybody move forward. So just thank you to you all. And then I wanted to leave you with a couple thoughts before we do some Q&A, if you'd like. First one is, who is going to buy a lotto ticket tonight, or already has bought a lotto ticket? Let's see some hands. Put them up high. OK, so what? 10 or 15% of the room. Just thinking about that and what's coming up ahead of us, I just wanted to pose another question to you that you don't have to answer unless you'd like to. And it's a bit of a reminder. Who's going to vote? So remember to do that coming up. Thank you. We're going to take some questions. And if I don't have the answer, I'll find somebody who does. So we have a mic up here and over there, I think. There are questions. Or shout it out. Or go to a reception. There's one here. Yes, there's a mic right here if you'd like.
So I heard you've canceled Iron Fist, so how do we find out what happens next?
Yeah. Sir, there's an amazing resource. They're called comic book stores. Yes, you have a question here.
I want to talk a little bit about your easy button.
Yes.
You said that way people could publish and schedule jobs as and when, publish data sources, I'm assuming.
That's right.
How do you handle redundancy of similar type of data and data objects being published and utilized by different workbooks?
So as far as like we're further enabling the environment, but also worried about the number of things out there? Right. Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's this dilemma in there as well. We don't want to be in the way of people that want to explore information, but we do want to know more about what's being put out there, so that if we can see that people are publishing similar things, we can then learn about that and perhaps direct them back onto like a curated and certified data set.
So you guys monitor?
We would love to, but that's where the data lineage part comes in. So right now it's really hard to get those insights, but in the meantime, we don't want to like lock it down and say that people can't access the information that they need to do their job. You can come on up to the mic if you have questions you want to ask.
Hey.
Oh, sorry, there's one over here.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious, is the tech stack and the tooling that you walked through strictly for your product analytics, or for like things like HR, recruiting, finance? Do they use similar tools?
Yeah, great question. So we have one data platform.
Okay.
We are mostly in the position where we don't care too much about security. We've always been a very open company. We're not dealing with healthcare, financial data. So for the most part, we try to be as open to everybody as we can. So almost all of our data, except for some SOX data and some people data, is accessible on our cloud data warehouse through all these tools I went through. So our HR team, our finance team, our content, our product teams, they all use the same tech stack.
Okay, so your team spends time like writing integrations for like third-party tools like Workday or ADP or things like that?
We
or
definitely have
are
third-party
you-
tools,
Okay.
and there's some integrations between those internally.
Okay.
And then if we want to do analytics on those, we will consume that data into the S3 data warehouse.
Gotcha. Cool.
Good
Thank you.
question. Yeah, you bet. Rebecca. Hi.
Yeah, so once you can connect Tableau to Druids, would there be anything you'd stop doing that you're currently doing?
Yes, maybe. So it's a good question. I think, so my team and others in our analytics group really do two things. We build tooling and tools and analytic products for our business users and our less technical users to interact with and to learn. That tech stack might become more Druid-centric and less Tableau-centric. But we would love to have all of that data be available to the people that do want to self-serve and do want to explore and build their own things. And so we would probably still use Tableau for that. Now, if we can completely replace extracts, for example, with Druid, we might explore that idea. Again, to the earlier question, we do want to enable everybody to access the information and build what they need. But maybe for like the curated, certified data sources, we would just publish those to Druid if we have a stable connector for Tableau.
Would you still like connect to other data warehouses, Redshift or Athena or anything like that? Or would you just go, you know, is Druid so good you think that it'd just be the only thing you'd use? Or?
It's a great question, and I think we would definitely look at that on a case-by-case basis, which is really what we do today. When I started, we were running Teradata. Right now, we don't. So as our needs shift over time, our tech stack will probably migrate as well. But at the moment, we have a variety of solutions because they all do certain things a little bit better or worse than the other. And so a lot of what we're trying to simplify is lowering the friction in that choice and making it easier for people to work with it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I lead the data science and data engineering team at Nutanix. And what I like to know is I get requests all the time from engineers who want to do a hack. They want to create their own Python application. They want to analyze company data. Do you ever get those requests, and how do you handle them?
We do, definitely. And actually in the Big Data portal, I didn't walk through it, there's a notebook section. And there's actually a complete environment we've built out around Python notebooks. So those spin up in their own containers, and anybody can access those and build whatever they want in them. Data science projects, if they want to just explore data, if they want to do Plotly, all those kinds of things.
And do you have some sort of governance policy of, okay, you can create an app, and here's a process to get access to that? I mean, we even get requests of, we want access to company financial data, things like that.
Great question. We are more open. We definitely try to just let people use their freedom and responsibility and judgment to decide what they should work with or not, what furthers their business goals. We try to get out of the way from people as much as possible. So if that engineer was working on a financial system and wanted to look at financial data in order to understand something he was building or she was building and wanted to use a Python notebook for that, we'd rather just let that happen than have lockdown data access that has to go through some sort of approval process to enable.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. All right, a couple over here.
Do you ever run into situations where people, because they have flexibility of pulling data from either straight from the portal or extracts, or where the data just doesn't jive between departments or teams? And how do you
Yes.
deal with that?
All the time. So the question was, if I can repeat it, do we have conflicts of business metrics and understanding if people are able to access information so freely? And we do. Normally, we're very open to that, because really we try to let the different parts of the vertical teams move at their own pace and work on their own goals. So if the content team wants to work with information, and so does the technology team, we'd rather get out of their way and let them move forward and not be gated or blocked by process or approvals. And the risk there is that information will conflict. But what we do as well is we have sync meetings and strategy meetings and a method of bubbling information up. Eventually, it's found, and then a debate comes up about what's right or wrong. As far as the Tableau environment goes, in general, that's where we want to reduce the number of data sets and lean more into like certified, sort of blessed data sets so that people know where to start from, that we've already sort of deconflicted that. But yes, we will tolerate conflict of information in order to lean into that ability to move quickly. Let's do over here and then back over. Actually, I'll do here and then I'll walk over there. Hi.
I just want to confirm that your big data platform is just transactional data and process data, right? That's your big data platform that you showed a while ago.
That slide?
Yeah, that slide.
Yeah, there's more to it. There's a lot more to it, actually. That's sort of the simplified overview, but that is the core components of our data platform. What I didn't put in there are some of the other service layers and other systems that come into play. Like we also have Elasticsearch. We have a lot of other APIs. There's Cassandra, and there's other parts of the total data platform. But for analytics, all the data flows through S3. Through Kafka, it goes into S3, and then we use either...
So do you use Hadoop also in hosting those data sets?
For Hadoop, yes. Yeah, we're moving beyond Hadoop, I think. It's been a great tool. It's what really opened up big data 10 years ago. But Spark is really the modern replacement for that. So now almost everything we do is based on Spark, and legacy jobs are more on the Hadoop MapReduce side, and we'll move into Spark.
All right. And also one last question.
Sure.
So you do your data blending in Tableau, and so Tableau is the only tool that you use for data blending, or you use your big data platform to blend data?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't do a lot of data blending in Tableau, because normally by the time we get our extracts built and people are looking at data, it can still be quite large. And blending just doesn't perform really well at the typical data volume that we have. So most of that blending happens in the query layer, which is why we've leaned more into saying, here's the data tables that you need to use. Here's how you would assemble that together with sample queries so that we can rely on our distributed, scaled cloud engines to do that blending heavy lifting for us.
All right. Thanks.
I'll disclaim that a little bit. We have 2,000 Tableau users, and I don't know what they're all doing. So I'm sure we have I'm sure we have data blending going on, and we just don't know about it. But I think because it's hard to do, we just don't do that a lot. So.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
Hi there.
Hello.
So I actually have two questions.
Okay.
Regarding your big data platform,
Yes.
Do you consider that to be your COE or center of enablement, or do you have another site that's maybe your center of enablement to provide information to analysts about,
This is really what we're focused on, and try to drive everybody to the big data portal and use the same big data platform.
Okay, so that's what you would consider your COE?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. And the second question is regarding getting to that one version of the truth and also like standardizing metrics across the organization with 300 employees that work in data. How do you drive that? How do you ensure that your analysts are running efficiently, not duplicating efforts?
Yeah, good question. We, as I mentioned before, will tolerate some duplication to keep organizations moving. We are trying to centralize on our big data portal as well so that we can say, these are the source of truth data tables. This is how you use them. These are the source of truth data pools or data sources in Tableau to go explore around. But because people can build their own things, we will, I think, always have some ragged edges. So we are having an education process as well. So there's overviews of the tools, the big data portal, the data domains, and we're trying to lean in on the education side and keep people connected. So as much as we can, we're trying to say, these are the identified sources of truth. But if you go use something else, you can, but you risk it not being correct.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. Great questions. I'm gonna have to scale this horizontally with some others.
My question was pretty similar. Like, how do you avoid the information silo? Because you mentioned that you make the data available to the whole, basically the whole company. But how do you avoid having many teams doing basically the same reports for their team and not knowing that there is already something doing it?
So how do we make sure that teams have the same reports if we're making the same data available?
Like, since the data is available for every team, like sometimes like there is the issue of information silo. Every team, like, they have a goal like they want to achieve, so they are
Yep.
going to do a report for that. But there is another team who is going to do exactly the same work.
Yep.
How do you avoid that?
So I mentioned we have this like executive view that Reed has driven over time. We do use that as sort of like our ruler for broad business metrics. So a lot of other teams that are using information will try to make sure that they match back to that central point. And it's sort of like, hey, does this match the executive staff reporting? And we'll start from there. There's so much happening at Netflix, and there's so many data consumers that there's a lot of leaf nodes on the tree. And people are working with data all the time that no one else is looking at. And at times, they're going to look at the same thing together. So it is a challenge, and it does come up. But for the most part, we try to at least say, here's some reference grade things to compare against. And then frequently, we learn across our teams, oh, you're working on that too? We should collaborate on that and see if there's a way to consolidate some effort and make sure that we're consistent. So, all right. Looks like we have a couple more, and then off to whatever you're doing tonight.
Hi there. It's pretty clear that you use a lot of open source technologies in your big data and your analytics platform. So I was wondering, and you've also made a lot of tools internally, like your portal. So do you have any plans to kind of give back to the open source community by open sourcing some of the stuff that you have already built?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So we actually have an open source page that we maintain. I think it's oss.netflix.com. We have about 80 projects in there right now. The open source work that we've done historically has been really on the cloud infrastructure side. So if you're familiar with AWS, or if you've heard about Jenkins or Spinnaker, those are two of the products that we've built to enable AWS automation, and they're very widely used across the industry. On the analytics side, we haven't done as much yet. We do have an open source library that we've released. A lot of this tooling we're still working on. I do think it's always sort of a eventual state we'd like to get to, but we haven't actively done that on the analytics side as yet in the tooling. So there are definitely component pieces that are in the big data platform, but they're not comprehensively released.
Great, thanks.
You bet. All right.
So you mentioned your data best practices in there. So how do you guys handle ad hoc scenarios? Because it seems like you're very distributed when it comes to tables and data source content. But how does the ad hoc process kind of work from an end user perspective? I guess kind of going back to the governance side of the business.
Yeah, I think it's really more that self-serve pattern, where if people are able to query data, the simplest thing they know how to do is just Tableau, new data connection, Presto, drop it in. So that comes up a lot in the ad hoc use cases. I do think our more power users know how to do that, but even more beginning users just connect to currently published workbooks or data sources and go from there.
Awesome. Thank you.
You bet. All right, we'll do the last one, and there's a few of us up here if you want to have more questions afterward. Hi.
Hi. So you mentioned that you guys want to invest heavily in Druid, and it seems like a predicate on that is having a front end, right, to engage with it. So while you're working through trying to figure out how to get it to work with Tableau, are you exploring other options like Superset?
Yep.
And if so, what has your experience been like up to this point?
Yeah, great question. So Druid is this data store that you can access in a variety of ways. Superset is a tool that I think Airbnb worked on originally and maybe still, and it's sort of a open source version of something like Tableau. It has a connector to Druid as well. We have used it. We have a couple teams using that. It's sort of it would be an investment project as well. And I think what we're landing on is Tableau already is amazingly good at what it does. So we can put energy into making data flow into it efficiently versus trying to put energy into a tool that's sort of rebuilding the same things that it already does really, really well. That said, it's a useful exploratory tool. It gives you enough to, I think, look at things, but we probably wouldn't try to build it out as a more enterprise type solution. For interacting with Druid on a more daily basis for development, there are things like Postman, which lets you post back and forth on the API to develop. And then in some of our web applications, we are thinking about some light data explorers just to make that easier to get to the next level. But I think we get a lot of value from Tableau. And I don't think it's wise for us to try to replace that product with something we develop internally. That's more my personal opinion, just for the record. All right, thanks everybody. We'll have a few people up here.